Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A website used by hackers has been discovered, and it contains the names and contact info for more than 500 million Facebook users. We hear from the Justice Centre, which was fighting for a Manitoba family after they were fined $18,000 for having expired COVID tests. And the idea of forcing someone to have a COVID vaccination passport to travel is not going over very well. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari has the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thank you so much for joining us. Alberta's going back to phase one of its health restrictions as government officials announced the new pandemic measures as of Wednesday. Government officials say the increased variant cases are the reason for the new restrictions. That includes no in-person dining in restaurants except for patios. Retail is limited to 15% capacity, and gym training is back to one-on-one with a trainer only. Premier Jason Kenney says his government cannot ignore the science and the numbers as a new wave has hit our province.
I cannot in good conscience ignore the evidence and opt for a policy that could result in hundreds of preventable deaths, of huge impact to our hospitals being flooded, and other critical health procedures being put at risk. I cannot and will not do that. Nobody wants to keep restrictions any longer than is absolutely necessary. I hope that's one thing, though, that we can all agree on.
Kenney adds that a new committee has been formed involving Health Minister Tyler Shandro, various MLAs, and health officials to plot a plan back to normalcy for Alberta as soon as possible. Lethbridge City Council voted 6-3 on Tuesday to extend the city's temporary mandatory face covering bylaw until December 31st. That means masks must still be worn at all times while in an indoor enclosed public space or a public vehicle. That'll include places such as malls, grocery stores, retail businesses, churches, and taxis. On December 8th, the province enacted its own province-wide mandatory mask requirement, which is still in effect. As of Tuesday, the city of Lethbridge had around 500 positive cases of COVID-19. Health Canada is advising Canadians not to use disposable face masks that contain graphene. The agency issued the notice saying those masks contain toxic particles and they may have been distributed in some healthcare facilities. The recall comes after the Quebec government warned against wearing the masks a week ago. Early testing with animals shows that graphene has the potential to cause lung toxicity. The potential risk with masks is still unknown. The department has requested information from mask manufacturers and is investigating. The Chinook Regional Hospital in Lethbridge is dealing with a couple of COVID-19 outbreaks. An outbreak was declared in one unit on March 29th with one patient testing positive for COVID-19. Another outbreak was declared on March 17th with one patient testing positive. There are now 2 confirmed cases. Alberta Health states that if there are 2 or more positive cases at a hospital, it is considered an outbreak. Meanwhile, at prisons, shelters, or childcare centres, an outbreak is declared when 5 or more people test positive for the novel coronavirus. Alberta's top doctor says the number of confirmed cases of a COVID-19 variant that are linked to a large employer is likely to rise. So far, 3 of 26 infections linked to work sites in the central and northern zones are confirmed to be the Brazilian variant. Dr. Dean Enshaw did not reveal who the employer is or what the industry the infected workers belong to. She says there was also an outbreak of 5 cases at a separate Calgary zone workplace. Personal information from 533 million Facebook accounts have been recently discovered on a website for hackers. The information appears to be from a 2019 hack, but it shows just how vulnerable our personal information can be when posted to a social media website. Reports say the information involves users from 106 countries, including phone numbers, Facebook IDs, full names, locations, birth dates, and email addresses. Now, this isn't the first time hackers have breached Facebook. In December of 2019, a Ukrainian security researcher reported finding a database with contact info of more than 267 million Facebook users. So how do we best protect ourselves and our personal information if we're active on social media?
We need to check our privacy settings and keep in mind that even if you say, only my friends can see what I'm posting, Facebook can still do what they want in the background because that's the terms of service that you have agreed to when you created your account, however long ago it is, and whatever the changes to the terms of service have been in the meantime. You've agreed to it. You can't stop them, but you can add an ad blocker so that you don't get bombarded with all of the advertisements that their customers are trying to sway you with. Adjust every browser that you use, the settings in each browser to restrict your cookies, and delete the cookies when you close the browser or the window. And sometimes go into the settings and double check and manually delete them. It's very simple. It's a listing and you just click to delete them.
Polsky says you can always check to see if your email address has been involved in a breach. She says all you have to do is visit haveibeenpawned.com and enter your email address. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he's very concerned by the lack of accountability that Iran continues to have on the shooting down of the Ukrainian passenger jet, which killed 176, including 57 Canadians. Trudeau says Canada will work with the international community to reform aviation standards and to ensure the families of victims get closure and justice from Iran.
We are tremendously concerned about the lack of accountability that Iran continues to have on this issue. The lack of transparency, the lack of a full and total investigation means that Canada, along with our fellow countries in the International Contact Group, will continue to put pressure on Iran to deliver true accountability and justice, compensation for the families. I spoke this morning with President Zelensky about the ongoing criminal trial and got an update on that. We will continue to work with the international community, work to reform international aviation standards, and mostly work to make sure that the families that I had the opportunity to meet with and sit down with, who continue to be heartbroken and will for the rest of their lives on the losses of these loved ones, get closure, get compensation, and mostly get justice from Iran.
A national group calling itself Liberty Coalition Canada has come under fire recently. The news comes from a member of the group, Ontario politician Randy Hillier, who made a post on Twitter comparing the recent lockdowns in Canada to Nazi Germany rule in the 1940s. Cypress Medicine Hat MLA Drew Barnes decided to leave the group after he said he strongly condemns the remarks made by Hillier. Barnes has been vocal in the past in pushing for a more regionalized approach when it comes to government lockdowns. Federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole is calling on the Liberal government to appoint a COVID-19 response watchdog. O'Toole also says the Tories would call a public inquiry into how the Liberals handled the pandemic.
Last month, Canada marked a national day of observance for those lost to the pandemic. But to truly honor their memory, we must pledge to learn from the mistakes made and improve our resilience and readiness as a country. Our attention should be on getting the country back on its feet. But when the pandemic is over, we need answers. We need to know what worked and what didn't. We need complete transparency and accountability. A Conservative government will call a public inquiry to examine every aspect of the government's pandemic response. We also call on the government to appoint a special monitor from the Office of the Auditor General to track the pandemic response in real time to ensure that valuable lessons learned are captured for future emergency readiness.
Now, the federal Conservatives have also demanded that the Liberals come out with a reopening plan to help save thousands of businesses across the country. So many are hurting right now during the pandemic. Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder says the lockdowns have been tough on everyone's mental health.
We're seeing suicide numbers go up. I mean, right now in Canada, every 24 hours, there are 10 people who commit suicide. We're seeing those rates go up dramatically in children. I mean, hell, this is not okay. We are not okay as a country. And you know, Canadians are begging for a concrete data-driven plan that is going to allow us to safely return to normal. Canadians deserve that, and that's what Conservatives are calling for.
Catch the full interview with MP Harder, as she'll also discuss how agriculture is fast becoming Canada's bread and butter. That's coming up after business news. Working from home has become the standard for many businesses during the pandemic. Oftentimes, employees have become comfortable in their routines, and according to Stats Canada, 80% of employees forced to work from home during the pandemic say they'd like to spend at least half of their hours working from home moving forward. BCN's Ainsley O'Reilly shares how things are trending locally and how news agencies like us right here at Bridge City News are adapting to the new normal as well.
BCN, among other news agencies, are not exempt from safely working from home. The news meeting on Discord. Interviews are conducted over Zoom. Even stories in the teleprompter can be written remotely. Officials from the Business Council of Alberta say that employee feedback has been mixed. Some are eager to return to the office, others want both, and many don't want to go back ever.
Even if there's 10% that find themselves working from home permanently, that could be a really significant change in the way our workforce works.
People working from home means more vacancies in commercial real estate. Calgary already is among the most vacancies in the country, but Lethbridge doesn't seem to have that problem.
Most of our agricultural businesses are still performing well. Most of our, office companies, although they might have staff working remotely, still see value in that presence. So we have not seen the impacts on our local commercial real estate markets as yet. We've probably in the last couple of years had 4 or 5 different inquiries looking for 15 to 20,000 square feet of warehousing space. And we've literally had nothing available.
And with many choosing to work from home,
there's been huge and increasing demand for single family homes, like a home with a yard versus people wanting to live in condos and things like that. And people are preferring to live in the kinds of places, if they're going to be spending more time in them, the kinds of places that they'd like to spend more time. They're prioritizing space and yards. Now, I think that could be very positive for an attractive community like Lethbridge.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Sick kids at Ronald McDonald Houses in Alberta will receive a generous donation of slippers from an organization located right here in Lethbridge. As Micah Quinn explains, organizers say that this slipper drive is just another way of showing how people in our city are giving back in a special way.
The Stitch It Forward Society of Lethbridge have sewn, knitted, and crocheted 400 slippers so far for sick kids in need.
And I know I have about 6 more ladies bringing me slippers, so maybe we'll make the 500 mark. We are donating them to the Calgary Ronald McDonald House, and then they are going to distribute them for us. We have some volunteers in Medicine Hat going to donate straight there, and I have a lady in Edmonton who made 100 slippers herself, and she took them to the Edmonton Ronald McDonald House.
There are 180 volunteers on the sign-up list for the society.
So I send out an email and ask everybody if they would like to help us with the project. And we've had so many helpers this go around. I would guess probably 85 different people have helped.
Waki says that the work that the Ronald McDonald House does holds a special place in her heart.
Both of my kids were in NICU when they were born. So when the Ronald McDonald House put out a call for slippers, I was really excited to help them. They're great. They help so many people, and people come to them last minute in emergency situations with, nothing, whatever was in their car. So whatever we can help is awesome.
The society will take the slippers up to the Ronald McDonald House in Calgary on April 10th and will live stream the handover. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Exhibition Park in Lethbridge had hoped to host their annual Home and Garden Show in person, but announced Tuesday, like the Ag Expo, it will be virtual this year. The directory will allow businesses to display their products and services to attendees. Exhibition Park will launch the event on Wednesday. Online resources will be available for several months.
The directory will be live over the next 12 months. It creates a scenario where it isn't kind of a big raw kind of thing for a live event and it just goes away. We really wanted to kind of incorporate a new strategy that, like I said, that can keep that conversation going for a full 12 months and really support the industry moving forward. And it's just a tool for those that are in the market, that are ready to do renovations, that maybe want to try and source a few different options or a few different quotes to really kind of see what's out there in Lethbridge so that people can, find their ways to support Southern Alberta, even though these businesses aren't able to gather, under one roof.
The annual directory for the show can be found online at hglethbridge.ca. Lethbridge residents of Scottish descent celebrated National Tartan Day and donned their kilts. Tartan Day in Canada started to become celebrated in the 1980s, and it was the year 1320 that the Declaration of Arbroath was signed.
So it was the first actual declaration of independence by the Scots in writing that went to the Pope. So that date's been used towards the fight for freedom of expression and identity. So that's where it comes from originally. The actual letter, there was only 3 copies of the original letter that was sent from 1320. I think one still exists, and it wasn't really mentioned in Scottish heritage until about the 15th, 16th centuries that it came back up again. So yeah, about 1980s, the Canadians, we started celebrate your heritage, celebrate your Scottish background and the contributions of Scots into society.
The Bridge City Highlanders have had to stop community events due to the pandemic, but Ferguson says that the group still celebrates on special occasions. An Alberta skier has died after he and another skier were caught in an avalanche in Banff National Park. Parks Canada says the pair were on the northeast face of Haddo Peak of Lake Louise on Monday when the avalanche was triggered. Avalanche Canada says the skier who died was carried 600 meters through extreme terrain. It says the survivor was able to descend and dig out his partner, who tragically did not survive. Charges and fines totaling $18,000 against a Manitoba mom and her 4 kids have been dropped. The incident occurred on February 15th when the family presented PCR tests to Canadian border agents that had expired by 2 hours due to vehicle issues while driving home. The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms represented the family, and the group's lawyer explained how they were able to fight for the family to have all of the charges dropped.
So the family crossed the border. They had gone to the US because the grandmother is having a serious terminal illness, and there was a specialist in the US who may have been able to help her. So that's the reason for the travel. And even though at the time that they left, there was no requirement for a PCR test, the mother was very conscientious about safety, and she wanted to make sure everybody actually had PCR tests before they came back. And so they had their PCR test, and while they were in the US, that's when the law came in that you have to have it. They crossed back into the border, and the PCR test has expired by 2 hours because they had car troubles. And because of this 2-hour delay, everybody, including the 4 children, were fined $3,000 each. And then they were sent to a quarantine facility where they had to wait for 3 days before they were released. We were able to negotiate with the Crown and set out all of the circumstances surrounding the travel. And because the Crown is able to use their discretion, and they looked at this case and they realized that this person had done everything in her power to make sure she was complying. Unfortunately, sometimes life happens, which is what happened in this case.
Hassan adds that the federal government still has not explained to her group why Canadians with negative COVID-19 tests cannot quarantine in their homes. Saskatchewan was set to table its budget on Tuesday, but Premier Scott Moe said the pandemic and uncertainty around revenues means the deficit could remain for some time. Moe promised during last October's election to eliminate the projected $2 billion deficit by the year 2024. He now says meeting that goal is highly unlikely. After the election, there was a spike in coronavirus cases in Saskatchewan, and the province has been offering emergency payments to small business owners hurt by its public health orders. Certain countries are looking at potential COVID-19 vaccine passports to show that you in fact have been inoculated against the virus. The term COVID passport doesn't sit well with many here in North America, as many feel it infringes upon our rights and freedoms. U.S. political reporter Lisa Daftari says the thought of Americans also being forced to have a COVID passport does not sit well with many of them either.
Here in the United States, the tagline that I'm seeing in many places, including all over Twitter, is "My COVID passport is the Constitution," where many believe that this is an overreach of the government to say that you need to be vaccinated. It is an infringement on our civil liberties, and it's also a pandemic. You have to look at both sides and say the science is there. We want people to be safe. And you can't really control people and how they if they're socially distant, if they wear their masks, if they wash their hands, if they come out with a cold.
Lisa will also have an update as to if migrant children stuck at the border will be reunited with their parents. Details coming up later in our newscast. Well, the temperatures across much of southwestern Alberta have been above seasonal, and that trend should continue for the short term. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. It was another beautiful spring-like day here in Lethbridge. In fact, I noticed that the trees in our yard are beginning to bud, which is always a good sign. Jeanette Rocher is here with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, those trees and bushes should be receiving some much-needed moisture as well soon.
Yes, well, we do have a chance of showers coming up on Thursday and again on a Saturday. So that moisture will be lovely to get our leaves growing and turn that grass nice and green. So it'll be nice to see some green coulees for a change. Make it feel like spring is really here for sure. Overnight tonight, a chance of clouds, 50 kilometer per hour winds, overnight low 2 degrees. Into tomorrow, Wednesday, increasing clouds, winds 50 to 70 kilometers per hour, high of 17 degrees. And then there's that chance of showers that we're going to be seeing on a Thursday, high of only 6 degrees there. Then climbing back up to 15 for Friday with a mix of sun and cloud. We do have a 60% chance of showers coming up on Saturday as well, with the temperature dropping to 7 degrees on Sunday, and up to 12 for Monday with a mix of sun and cloud. So it is a little bit like a roller coaster, definitely staying above that 0 mark, which is what we want to see, and for the most part above this seasonal high, which is 11 degrees. Seasonal low on average is -3. 22 was our high temperature back in 1977, and in 1975 we had our chilliest day on record, which was -18. 6:57 is when the sun rose this morning, and our evening sunset, 8:10 p.m. So let's take a look at what's happening across the rest of the country tomorrow. Over on the West Coast, there is a chance of showers and drizzle and rain. It's going to be a wet one over on the West Coast. In Victoria, 10 degrees. Juan de Fuca Strait's going to have 50 kilometer per hour winds. Vancouver, high of 10, 13 in Edmonton, 16 in Calgary, with increasing clouds in both of those cities, and 50 kilometer per hour winds in Calgary and 40K winds in Edmonton. Lovely across the rest of the prairies. Look at this, sunshine and 19 in both Saskatoon and Regina, 16 degrees in Winnipeg with a mix of sun and cloud. Regina and Saskatoon experiencing a bit more wind than Winnipeg. Over in central Canada, Toronto's high, 13 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud. Beautiful sunshine in Ottawa tomorrow, 18 degrees the high, and a high of 16 in Montreal. So get your sunglasses out. Also, UV indexes are a factor as well. UV index of about 5 in those cities. Lots of precipitation happening in Atlantic Canada tomorrow. 30% chance of showers in Fredericton, high of 10, high of 11 in Halifax. With fog as well, fog in many of these cities. So showers and fog dissipating in the afternoon, 6 degrees in Charlottetown tomorrow, and 5 in St. John's with 2 to 4 millimeters of rain tomorrow, as well as some wind. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
The International Monetary Fund is predicting a big rebound from the pandemic recession in its latest forecasts for global economic growth. It says the rollouts of COVID-19 vaccines and government aid will accelerate growth to a record 6% this year. That is up from 5.5% that was forecasted in January. The IMF is predicting Canada's economy will grow 5% this year, which is well ahead of the 3.6% that was predicted earlier. The head of a group representing oil and gas producers in Canada says they're looking forward to being a key part of North America's economic recovery. Tim McMillan of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers says the sector is rebounding to pre-COVID levels of production and pricing. He says the recovery is coming along nicely despite predictions of the end of the oil industry during the pandemic and a global price war. He made the announcements during the opening of the 2021 Scotiabank Cap Energy Symposium, which is being held virtually again this year. A report from TD Bank says 50 to 75% of those working in the energy sector could potentially lose their jobs by the year 2050. That's when the federal government set its goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions. The TD report says the clean energy transition will create new job opportunities. It is calling on resources to help displaced oil and gas workers because it says there are no guarantees they'll benefit from the change. A federal government committee is spending another day reviewing the proposed $26 billion purchase of Shaw Communications by Rogers. The deal announced on March 15th still needs regulatory approval. Rogers directly competes in some markets with Shaw's Freedom Mobile, which is Canada's 4th largest wireless carrier. The Commons Industry, Science and Technology Committee heard from a couple of academic experts today who study the Canadian telecommunications industry. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 77 points on the day to finish at 19,104. The Dow was down 96 points to 33,430. The S&P 500 was down 3 points to 4,074. And the Nasdaq was down 7 points on the day to 13,698. West Texas Intermediate oil was up 61 cents to 59.26 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 5 cents to 2.46 US. Gold was down 9 cents to 17.43.18 US an ounce. And silver was down a cent to 25.15 US an ounce. Wheat is at $305 per metric ton. Barley's at $320. Canola's at $7.85. And corn is at $340 per metric ton. Live cattle were up $1.35 to $122.73. Feeder cattle were up 3 cents to $146.48. And lean hogs were down 30 cents to $102.10. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 79.56 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Health Canada is advising Canadians not to use disposable face masks that contain graphene. The agency issued the notice saying that those masks contain toxic particles may have been distributed in some healthcare facilities. The recall comes after the Quebec government warned against wearing the masks a week ago. Early testing with animals shows that graphene has the potential to cause lung toxicity. The potential risk with masks is still unknown. The idea of having a COVID-19 vaccine passport in order to travel or maybe to go to concerts or big sporting events is not sitting well with many, including our neighbors south of the border. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have details for us in just a moment. The U.S. Capitol Police Union is urging Congress to beef up security around the Capitol after an officer was killed outside of the building. To talk about this in more detail is U.S. political reporter Lisa Daftari. Lisa, a union spokesperson, says the attack combined with the violent events of January 6th have left officers reeling.
Oh, this is awful. Obviously, who wants to work for the Capitol Hill Police? I mean, who wants to work for the police, period? We're having such a moment here in the United States where there is no respect for police. What little boy or girl grows up saying, I want to be like the police. I want to be spit on. I want to be shot at. I want to be totally disrespected, defunded. Even though many of the cities who defunded their police forces are now regretting it and have to beef up their support systems again. The Capitol is obviously a place that's extremely sensitive after January 6th and continuing through. We have a lot of assets there right now because of this increased risk. This car ramming that happened was what they're calling a one-off, but why was there another attack at the Capitol? The chief there says that they are in a minus 232 officer deficit from the 2,000 police presence that they like to have or those available. And in addition, in the next 5 years, more than 500, almost 600 of those officers are eligible to retire. So at any moment, any one of these officers can hand in their paperwork. And that's what they're afraid of, that there won't be that replenishment. There won't be the next, graduating class that wants to step up and say, we want to work there, or we want to work for the police, or we want to work in law enforcement. It's awful. I mean, I know that as our neighbors, you're watching and looking at what's happening in the United States, such a huge cultural, social shift here, and the police and how it will be viewed in the next 10 years, I think, has been truly affected. And this is a story that really confirms that.
U.S. government facilities which are holding migrant children along the Mexican border are stretched beyond thin, Lisa. An independent monitor concluded that the overcrowding has created unsafe conditions for thousands of minors in U.S. custody today.
Yes, and the statistics are just mind-boggling. The numbers, the footage. We're not seeing too much of that. The mainstream media is remaining hushed about this. A lot of Democrat lawmakers are remaining hushed about this, but others are taking it upon themselves to take independent tours of these facilities, of the border, to look at and provide these types of statistics and numbers to us. Look, if it were not a COVID year, if it were not a pandemic year, these children are being, and adults as well, being crammed into over 70% of the occupancy of these rooms. Now, add to that we're in a pandemic year, add to that many of these individuals may be affected with COVID and spreading it to others in this close proximity. It's awful, it's inhumane, and it just goes to speak to, you may want to have a lax immigration policy, but just look at the logistics on the ground and look at the facilities that we have. It can't be this way.
Yeah, these kids have to be reunited with their parents, their folks. A once secret unit within the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center in Cuba that has fallen into disrepair, Lisa, has been closed, and the prisoners are being moved to another facility on the American base in Cuba?
Yes, so this is just a reshifting. I think a lot of people were hoping that it was just going to be shut down for good. There's about 40 total Gitmo detainees. The number is probably just a handful of those who have been moved. We don't have an exact number, but let's say several have been moved to another facility. And this one facility has been shut down for now, and they have been reshuffled, so to speak. But here, I mean, every now and then we have an article about, Guantanamo, what's going on there, how the detainees are being treated, how many are there. So we have a head count now of 40.
A big moment as the United States, Japan, and South Korea have pledged to work together in dealing with North Korea, the Asian nation which has been testing long-range missiles. Now, what will that agreement actually look like between the three countries, Lisa?
Yeah, they'll have to work out the details, but the first step is for these countries to formally, I mean, we knew that they are all, it's like the enemy of my enemy of my enemy of my enemy. So they all got together and said, look, we are going to stand firm against North Korea and its continued chest thumping in the region. Every week there's a new report about missile tests and, showing off of their new technologies there. Look, they understand that there's a new sheriff in town, and that we're talking about the White House in Washington, D.C. So it's no surprise that North Korea, like many other rogue nations, are testing the limits of the White House and President Biden. And it's nice to see others come together. And this was under the watch of Jake Sullivan, our national security head, where these countries got together and said, we're behind you, and let's work out some kind of deal where we stand firm against North Korea and curb their growth in the region.
The foreign minister of Jordan says an alleged plot by Jordan's former crown prince to undermine the government was foiled. Lisa, it allegedly involved a plan to destabilize the country, but to what end?
Right, exactly right. I mean, this was a crazy story. When I saw this, it's like a movie. Jordan, as you may know, is a quite a stable country within the Middle East. It has a pretty stable past, present, and future. It has a king and queen that are very Americanized. They have a great relationship with the United States as well as Israel in the region. And we're talking about the heads of state here. So, I mean, that's pretty stable considering the Middle East and the actors out there. Now, no one would have believed that this would have happened within the royal family. This is the former crown prince that is being accused of trying to work together with some of his cronies to destabilize the government. And so his phone calls and some of the communication was intercepted, and now he is under house arrest with no communications and no ability to tell his side of the story. But I mean, we're staying tuned for more details because this is very juicy, and we're trying to see who he was in touch with. Also, one of the other interesting details is that they believe foreign nations were involved. But who would want to destabilize Jordan? Who would want to take down the current king and queen? And we'll have to see as this unfolds. But they were quite certain that they did foil an actual plot, and now he is under house arrest.
It does sound like a Hollywood script, absolutely here. Lisa, desperate refugees are fleeing Myanmar to Thailand and India to escape the crisis since the military coup. Thousands are seeking safety. But both authorities in the two countries have tried to block new arrivals, fearing that a steady flow may become a flood of migrants if unrest in Myanmar continues.
Yes, and isn't that how it always happens, right? My cousin went over, now they found a safe haven, I'm going to go over, and that's how it begins. The trickle becomes the flood. And it's no surprise. These individuals are hoping for better days. They're hoping for a stable life. And in Myanmar, it doesn't look like they're going to get there anytime soon. The military is not letting up, and doesn't look like we're going to get life back to normal there anytime soon. And as you stated, these neighboring countries have tried to stop these refugees from coming in. They've tried to shut their doors, but it's obviously impossible. So they will have to try to at least deter some individuals from going over, perhaps work together with the military in Myanmar to work something out so people can just stay put, and we don't have another refugee crisis in another part of the world.
Myanmar anti-coup protesters launched an Easter egg strike during the holidays. Now, what did that look like?
Oh my goodness, what beautiful pictures came out of something that is, you know, pretty sad, but individuals try to make the most of it. Instead of celebrating Easter the way they usually do with a parade and showing their Easter eggs, they use that opportunity to make a political statement, writing on their eggs political protest slogans, and showing them in this parade that they had. Beautiful pictures. We're going to actually put them up on the Foreign Desk Instagram shortly. The pictures are going up soon. But it's so nice to see them use these colors of Easter and this time of holiday, springtime, renewal, rebirth, hope, and to create some optimism for the people and to present their political protests in a way that it comes together. It brings everyone together. So those pictures were just absolutely beautiful.
Need something to lift people's spirits, absolutely. The term COVID-19 passports has come up here in Canada, and it's also come up in the UK. Lisa, Britain is apparently planning to test measures including coronavirus status certifications to see if they will allow people to safely return to mass gatherings at sports arenas, nightclubs, and concerts.
Hal, this is so troublesome. I know that there is obviously such a debate around this topic in every part of the world. I know in Europe, and as you stated, in Canada and the United States and the UK, where they're actually going to implement it for a while. Here in the United States, the tagline that I'm seeing in many places, including all over Twitter, is "My COVID passport is the Constitution," where many believe that this is an overreach of the government to say that you need to be vaccinated. It is an infringement on our civil liberties, and it's also a pandemic. You have to look at both sides and say the science is there. We want people to be safe, and you can't really control people and how they if they're socially distant, if they wear their masks, if they wash their hands, if they come out with a cold. It's difficult. It's difficult to say, but I think a lot of people are going to fight this. I know the governor in Florida, who has become such an icon for civil liberties and freedoms during this time, and his state has remained open and free and safe from COVID for the most part. He has signed a bill saying, well, I'm not going to allow this. I'm not going to allow this COVID passport thing to go through. And I think a lot of other people will be fighting it as well. I know there have been protests in the UK, all over Europe, that are fighting this. And on the other hand, government officials want us to be safe. If you're going to a concert, you want to make sure everyone, I know here in Los Angeles, for example, I know people have had weddings where they've required people to show up with a proof of a negative COVID test, for example. I mean, wow. It's I don't know how we're going to get through this, but
you do see both sides of it, right? Like you said, you want people to be safe, but at the same time, you have constitutional rights here being infringed upon.
Right. And you know what, Hal? I think the constitutional rights being infringed upon for me is much more important. And I want to believe that people will be safe and people will be responsible. But I understand the other side of the argument as well. But it's a slippery slope. This entire COVID this whole process has been a slippery slope on our liberties, on our freedoms, to say that you must wear a mask, to say that you must do this and you must do that, the schools being closed, the children not having, their right to education. There are so many different, conversations to be had. There's so many challenges to our Constitution and to, just the basic rights that humans have, regardless of what country they live in. So I think this will be up for debate, but we just hope we can be rid of this pandemic and get out of this era as soon as possible.
And we can't forget about all of the thousands of business owners who've lost their livelihood. In Canada alone, 10,000 restaurants have shut down, Lisa. Incredibly sad. Now here's an interesting story coming out of the Jerusalem Post, which said that the last known Jew is leaving Afghanistan. The man says the U.S. military's promise to leave the country will leave a vacuum to be filled with radical groups, including the Taliban.
What a story, right? My reaction to this story was I didn't know there were any Jews left in Afghanistan, but we say that about every part of the Middle East where there used to be thriving communities of Jews within like the tens of thousands, and now obviously dwindling numbers of Jews. I know there's still communities in Iran, for example, in Morocco, and other parts of the Middle East, but this last Jew leaving Afghanistan, I'm sure it's very upsetting for those who have that background. They are Afghani Jews. this is the end of their chapter, the end of their legacy as Afghanis living as Jews in the Middle East. But as you said correctly, as these minorities leave, whether they're Christian, Syrian, Baha'i, Jews, it does create the vacuum. It does create that absence of other that will be filled by extremism, even with moderates, with the immigration in like Syria or Iran, with countries where the more moderate people, the more educated people are leaving the country. That creates a vacuum as well, where the more jihadists, the more extremists can come in and fill that. So this is one of the side effects of the Middle East's changing population shifts. But on the bright side, we also have the Abraham Accords, and we have, a lot more of that modernity coming to the Middle East. And I'm sure countries like Afghanistan that are left in the dark will soon join up and say, we want what they have. We want the technology, we want the iPads, we want the iPhones, we want an education, and we want to be right there with all of those modern Middle Eastern countries. And hopefully the rest of the Middle East will catch up as well.
Absolutely. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thank you, Lisa.
My pleasure.
The federal Liberals announced a highly anticipated or perhaps dreaded budget will be coming out on April the 19th. We should see how many billions of dollars have been spent during the pandemic. To discuss this in more detail is Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder joining me from Ottawa. Rachel, billions have been spent, but billions more need to be spent to help businesses survive right now.
Well, Hal, that's one opinion. The other one is perhaps we could let industry leaders do what they do best, and that is, of course, put forward creative ideas, be innovative, be entrepreneurial, and roll a profit. As a result of that, of course, it provides jobs, and it meets consumer demand, which I think is ultimately really great for our economy and gets the ball rolling again.
So what do you think of all of the money that the Trudeau Liberals have been spending, the taxpayers' dollars so far during the pandemic?
At first, when the pandemic became a reality, parliamentarians agreed to shutting down Parliament for 2 weeks. I'll note that it's 53 weeks later. And we wanted to give time for the federal government, the Liberals, to come up with a plan and to be able to move forward with that. Unfortunately, we still don't have that plan. But initially, they asked to be able to roll out some money in order to help Canadians who were finding themselves in a really difficult situation. And of course they were in a difficult situation. They were forced to stay home, and lockdowns prevented them from being able to work. And so when the government puts those types of measures in place, of course the government should also make up for that by providing some financial assistance. However, again, it's 53 weeks later and counting. There's still no concrete plan in place in terms of coming out of this pandemic and being able to return back to normal. And I think Canadians are desperate for that.
Yeah, your leader, Aaron O'Toole, wants the government to produce that plan within 20 days to start lifting COVID-19 restrictions, Rachel. That includes reopening the border to the U.S. for non-essential travel. How important is it to reopen that border?
It's certainly about reopening the border, but it's about so much more. Again, it's about putting a plan in place. I mean, we're talking about a data-driven plan that will serve Canadians well toward a vibrant future. And we just don't have that. And again, that was promised at the beginning. We were told that we were going to shut down for 2 weeks, give the government an opportunity to find its bearings, to figure out what was going on, to be able to flatten the curve. And then we were going to come back and put a concrete plan down on paper and then start implementing. Again, 53 weeks later, that still hasn't happened. And so we have, those who have small businesses, they're hurting immensely. We have individuals who have lost their jobs. In fact, over 1 million Canadians have lost their jobs during this time. But Hal, the story is worse than that even, and that is to say that the secondary health effects of the pandemic actually have to do with mental health concerns. We're seeing them skyrocket. We're seeing suicide numbers go up. I mean, right now in Canada, every 24 hours, there are 10 people who commit suicide. We're seeing those rates go up dramatically in children. I mean, hell, this is not okay. We are not okay as a country. And Canadians are begging for a concrete data-driven plan that is going to allow us to safely return to normal. Canadians deserve that, and that's what Conservatives are calling for.
So let me ask you something. With everything that's been said and done, and especially now that more of the vaccines are rolling into Canada, do you think perhaps we'll see an election this spring?
Well, Hal, look, here's what I can tell you. I can tell you that the Liberals are ramping up spending. I can tell you that the Liberals are really enjoying playing with the data when it comes to vaccines. Most recently, they've said that they're now going to allow for up to 4 months between dose 1 and dose 2, which health officials have warned against. But the reason that the Liberals want to do that is because they want to be able to report back to Canadians how many shots have been put in arms rather than how many Canadians have been fully vaccinated. That number is very different, but they're thinking that it'll make them look good. On top of that, Trudeau is ahead in the polls right now. And of course, that's a prime time for him to call an election. It's sad because he's taking advantage of a situation that puts him ahead in the polls and would allow him to then call an election and potentially be quite successful in that. But it's at the expense of Canadians. They don't want to be dragged out right now when we're in the middle of dealing with a pandemic. They want this government to get to work and solve the real problems that are in front of us.
So it's safe to say that your party doesn't want an election right now?
I think that's safe to say, Hal.
Okay. Now let's talk about Bill C7 for just a moment here, Rachel. The Medical Assistance in Dying Bill, which received royal assent. What are some of your biggest concerns regarding the new MAID bill?
Yeah. Hal, I really appreciate you asking this question because I think it's something that's not getting proper coverage in our nation. This bill will forever change the social fabric of Canada. It will forever change the way that we view life and death. And so Bill C7 expands the legislation around euthanasia. It allows for those who have a mental illness to request euthanasia, and the mental illness can be their sole reason for doing so. Now, that's the result of an amendment that came back from the Senate when it was sent there. But before that amendment was even made, I believe that the bill already went too far, that it failed to protect those with a disability. Ultimately, as legislators, we should be concerned with the most vulnerable. That should be top of mind for us. And unfortunately, this legislation just doesn't do that. In fact, I would say that it makes them further at risk of being, mistreated. We heard compelling testimony from many, many, many witnesses who came forward at committee during the time that this bill was studied. And those witnesses, who had a disability or who had a mental illness, they pleaded with those members of the committee not to go in this direction.
Now, the federal Liberals have been blasting the Tories, your party, over climate change. Did your party recently vote to say at your convention that climate change is not real, as some of the mainstream media has been reporting?
Hal, it's interesting because the Liberals have had more than 5 years to put forward an environmental plan. And the most they've been able to come up with is a carbon tax. And then on top of that, during the pandemic, they had the nerve to increase that carbon tax even further. I mean, that's something that's impacting everyday Canadians, whether you're driving your kids to soccer practice or you're driving to work or you're heating your home. Oh my goodness, how dare you heat your home in Canada, for crying out loud? Like, that's what this government's plan is in terms of climate action. Hell, look, at the end of the day, our plan needs to be focused on stewardship. So as Conservatives, yes, we are exactly that. We are conservatives of the environment. So let's steward it really well. We only have one Earth. Let's take care of it. Let's put, practical steps in place that are going to facilitate a green planet. And I think by that, what I mean largely is we need to partner with industry. I mean, after all, we're talking about some of the most creative minds. We're talking about scientists. We're talking about those individuals who really have practical solutions to the problems we face when it comes to caring for the environment. As Conservatives, we believe in bringing them to the table, giving them a voice, and helping us move forward toward a solution.
So your party did not vote to say at the convention that climate change is not real then, in other words?
I think it's important to acknowledge that that was a two-part motion. And so one was acknowledging that climate change is real, and the other part to that motion was talking about how then to solve the problem. And so there were discrepancies in terms of, members within the party had disagreements in terms of how that solution should be rolled out. The vote fell where it fell.
Let me ask you something. Why the Liberals focus so much on climate change when we're still in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic?
Hal, that's a great question. I would argue that the Liberals are more full of talking points than they are any sort of action that would result in real change. For whatever reason, they've chosen that that should be a significant part of their narrative. But when we talk to Canadians, when I talk to those who come into my office or who call my office or who email my office, when I talk to Canadians, when I'm walking down the street here in Ottawa, even, what the issues that are top of mind for them are their family, their loved ones, taking care of their health, their well-being. I don't hear a lot of conversation around the environment these days.
And jobs. I mean, 10,000 restaurants. A new study came out, a new report. More than 10,000 restaurant owners had to close their doors across the country during the pandemic. It is so sad. Rachel, ever since Derek Sloan was punted from the CPC, the Conservative Party of Canada caucus, many are concerned about the fate of social conservatives within your party. Now, were some of those concerns addressed at the recent convention?
Yeah, Hal, I think one of the important things to note here is that the Conservative Party of Canada is the only party that allows for diversity of thought. Now, what that means is that, we hold a variety of viewpoints and sometimes we're going to disagree. But you know what, Hal, instead of looking at that as a disadvantage or a weakness, I actually view that as a strength. Because when I look at Canada, I see a country that is pluralistic in nature, a country where we have people from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life with all sorts of beliefs and values. And, I think the Conservative Party of Canada shows itself to be a place where those individuals can find a political home because we reflect that diversity. And so, yes, sometimes we disagree, but let's learn to disagree without being disagreeable. I think Conservative members are trying our best to do that.
Now, you recently referred to Canada's agriculture sector as Canada's unsung superpower. Now, you say that agriculture and agri-food sectors contribute more than $100 billion to Canada's economy, which runs up to about 7% of our GDP. Rachel, is this the wave of the future, putting more of our eggs into the agribusiness basket? Pun intended?
Great pun, Hal. I certainly believe so. Absolutely. I've talked about this extensively. I believe that agriculture is our way forward. Agri-production, agri-science, agri-tech, agribusiness. Like, this is the way of the future. And we happen to be so incredibly blessed in Southern Alberta, and in particular in Lethbridge, because we have all of the necessary ingredients to excel. We have great soil, we have great sun, we have great access to water through irrigation, and we have fantastic talent and labor. And so with these key ingredients in mind, and available at our fingertips, we really have the ability to drive agriculture forward and to really lead not only within our country, but I would even say on the world stage.
What do you see as some of the most pressing issues here in Lethbridge that we're dealing with? Obviously, COVID-19, the pandemic, a lot of business owners are struggling. But let's also talk about the recent report from Alberta Health Services showing that in 2020, 52 people in our city died from a drug overdose, drug poisoning. And across the South Zone, there were 102 deaths caused by drug use, or a rate of 32.8 per 100,000 people. The provincial average was 28.7 per 100,000 people. So we still have a drug crisis here in our city.
Yeah, and how it's so sad because I think what we have to first do is pause and acknowledge that these individuals are human beings. And they are people who have loved ones most often. And those loved ones are, hugely impacted by the overdose and the potential death that results. And so I think we have to acknowledge that first and foremost. I think the other thing we have to acknowledge is that, most people don't just stumble into a drug addiction. Most people don't choose that as their the thing that they want to engage in most in life. Most people, there's something else that happened that drove them to that. It's usually a coping mechanism for something absolutely devastating that took place. And so all that to say, I think, we have a responsibility then to hold hope out to these individuals. And hope looks like detox. It looks like recovery. It looks like, mental health services. It looks like really helping these individuals be restored to a place of dignity and purpose, and where they are, able to look at themselves in the mirror and be really proud of who they are and excited about their future. They deserve that.
Thank you, Rachel. Let's talk about federal infrastructure projects for Lethbridge for just a moment. What can we look forward to possibly seeing come down the pipe?
Hal, I wish we could look forward to a whole lot. Unfortunately, this government has promised a ton when it comes to infrastructure, and I would even say that they've spent a ton, or at least they claim to have. They created something called an infrastructure bank for building major infrastructure projects across this country, and they allocated $35 billion to it. But to date, they haven't been able to show evidence of a single project being completed. And so this is a problem across the country, and we certainly see that as a problem in Lethbridge because we really haven't received much in the way of federal funding for infrastructure.
Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Harder, thanks for joining me today from Ottawa.
Thank you, Hal, for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks for watching.